Hey everyone, this is George Soto,
Hello, this is Rosa Jimenez.
and you're watching Pivot Stories. Today we're joined by a good friend of mine, Whitney Sales, who's a partner at Accelerprise Ventures and also runs a sales consultancy helping companies of all sizes called The Sales Method. Whitney, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm up here in Tahoe, as you guys can see by the log cabin right now. So, pretty nice.
This is our new normal, and I kind of like it actually. Like, I'm not all about like 100% being stuck in the house all the time, but I do like maybe a hybrid kind of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. I'm going to be starting to switch my time up between Tahoe and the Bay Area, trying to get more comfortable with what's going on with COVID. But I'm pretty happy up here.
Awesome. Cool.
You're a
Well,
little bit outdoorsy. So, for our audience, we already know that you are friends with Jorge, but we would like to know a little bit more about you. Introduce yourself, define who you are, a little bit about your career and how you become who you are today.
Yeah, so my last name is actually Sales, because that usually is the first question most people ask, as cheesy as it is. I got into sales kind of by happenstance. Ended up moving up to the Bay Area and working for a company called LoopNet, which is a online commercial real estate platform. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's the largest globally. While I was there, about 4 months into the company, I was selected to launch a new product completely from scratch. I had no idea what I was doing because I, had four months of sales experience, but I was kind of a natural seller, and I was really good at breaking down systems and processes. I'm kind of a systems process thinker. Turns out to be a benefit of dyslexia, and while I was there, we ended up hitting, or when I launched that product, we ended up hitting our annual targets in 3 months. And that kind of set me on the path of falling in love with launching products. And so, took several steps in B2B SaaS, worked a year, a kind of stint in consumer electronics. I get into detail with those, but really fell in love with working with founders, launching products, building out teams, got some management experience under my belt, launched over the course while I was working for companies, 5 separate products. And of those 5 companies, 4 of them were on the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies list. And in my latest job, I just worked there for about 3 months, but I realized that I didn't want to work for one company, that I really wasn't utilizing my skill set of working with founders, that I could work with multiple companies at the same time, and spun out and started the sales method. Shortly after that, I'm giving you guys a long story, but shortly after that, I ended up meeting Mike, who is my business partner at Accelerprise Ventures. I was the first founder to join. I was the 37th female VC at the time. There were
nice.
just the two of us. Yeah. There were just the two of us. And now we're over 20. There's one location. We're now in 3. We plan on opening up another one this year. So pretty exciting.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's talk about pivots, right? Because it's so funny. People tend to see the actual pivot or version of the company that worked. How would you define a pivot for the folks out there?
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, people think of a drastic shift in a product. I mean, Slack is a really good example. It started as a gaming company and then turned into a messaging platform. Kind of crazy to think about. But in reality, it can be simple things like pivoting your go-to-market and who you're targeting. It could be moving to a product-led growth funnel versus an inside sales team. You might focus on an enterprise company and decide, actually, you know what, our product is better for mid-market right now. So there's lots of different versions of pivot, but really it's a shift and change in what you're doing or what you're focusing that shifts the strategy of the organization. That's how I would define it. And it could be product, it could be go-to-market, etc.
Really good. And do you remember an experience of a pivot in which you were part and went well? And why did you think it went well?
Yeah, I can think of a lot of examples. I mean, I've funded over 100 companies myself through the accelerator at Accelerprise, and then advised, probably another 50 or so. So there's lots of pivots I've been part of, some of them small, some of them large. So I can't list specific companies because I'm an NDAs as an investor until the company is acquired or IPOs.
Okay.
So, or I have permission from the founder, but several of them I can think of. One of them was a document verification product. They originally started working with press, looking at press documents and authenticating press documents. What they ended up doing is actually shifting to the financial sector, and they've really taken off. I have another company I worked with, and different product with some slight product changes along there with it when they shifted, because they did shift their product roadmap as well based on the customer needs. Another company I worked with, they do basically think of a Alexa for manufacturing, the keyboard problem in the manufacturing space. And when I originally started working with them, they were focused on the auto space. We did some demand gen with them, realized that there were several target accounts that were moving really quickly, actually outside of the auto space, and realized we needed to move into food manufacturing because they were a bit more mature from a manufacturing standpoint and had a higher need. So, those are just two of the pivots I can think of, and those are specifically in the go-to-market. I've also, like I said, I've had companies who have shifted from a marketing-based sale to, and this is if you're in the SMB, it's probably a shift or a pivot you're going to go to, because it's going to dramatically shift your overall go-to-market and reduce your CAC. But you're going to be shifting initially from an inside sale, probably with a founder-led selling, to more of a marketing base sell and having our marketing strategy for a bottoms up sell. So there's lots of different versions of pivot I've been part of that have been successful.
That's actually a really great question that sort of segues us into my next question, which is, what tips would you give founders and CEOs, those early folks, maybe early sales folks or sales leaders, around successfully pivoting? Like, I know that, it's such a broad statement, but if there was anything around perhaps pivoting your sales, when do you know, hey, it's time to pivot the sales motion?
Yeah. So my specialty is in pre-seed to Series A, is really kind of my sweet spot in working with companies and building out their go-to-market. And so the big thing that I like to instill in the founders and sales leaders I work with at the early stage is really you're really developing your product market fit for scale. And so you don't quite know things yet. And so everything you should be doing should be testing. You should be iterating constantly. So when I first get a sales team going, there's the SDR hire, which I treat as the founder sales assistant to get going, that brings in the next SDR hire, which then brings in the next AE if you're doing an inside or enterprise sell. Again, there's also bottoms up and SMB based sell, which will be a little bit different. But if we're doing that specifically, one of the things I actually work with the team on is constantly is meeting on a weekly basis and constantly thinking about ways that they can improve their own process and reviewing what's working and what's not. So anytime you find there's something that's not working, you need to come back to kind of the basics and look at what is actually working. What do you know? Because you learn a lot by what's not working too. What do you actually know? What have you learned? What have you ruled out that doesn't work? And start to narrow down your focus. It always starts with your customer vertical or horizontal description, right? The kind of ICP, and then the personas that sit within that. And then you need to learn how they actually buy, and then how they actually learn. And we make assumptions a lot of the time that we know, and in many cases we don't. For founders specifically who brought in a sales leader, there's a lot of cautionary sales or cautionary tales, around this, where you'll bring in a sales leader to kind of solve your sales problem. And in reality, what they'll end up doing is bringing their sales playbook and what they know, instead of taking a generalist approach and actually figuring out what is the playbook that's right for your company, your product, and your customer. And so if you're seeing that something's not working when you brought in a head of sales and things aren't growing as quickly as they should, it might be an issue with your sales leader, or it might be a need to dramatically pivot your go-to-market.
I see, but I think what you're saying is super deep. Like, because usually people attach to their playbook and they think that recipe it's gonna work. So, what piece of advice could you give to a CEO or founder that is looking for a new playbook or a way to change the way VCs are investing?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. There's two separate questions in there. So one, there's the B2B SaaS playbook, and then there's the second piece of it is how you pitch that to an investor, which are interesting and pretty different. So the sales playbook itself, it's really important to look at, again, how your customer buys and how they learn. And that's going to inform a lot around your overall sales strategy. For example, if you're selling into a developer doesn't like to be sold to. They like to discover products and learn about products from their friends. So you're going to be looking at a pretty heavy developer type content strategy. So think APIs, really, really good API documentation, developer communities, ways to evangelize yourself in the community, give them tools, maybe open source, right? So there's lots of different ways that you may go about the developer sale, where if you're selling into a salesperson, for example, you're probably going to be doing a free trial of some sort. And it might even be a direct sale, depending on your price point. Versus if you're selling into an enterprise company, it's going to be a whole different playbook. So it's really about looking at how your customer buys, learns, and really adapting to that, as opposed to trying to apply an individual playbook. And I would encourage everyone to talk to people at the early stage who have broad experience in a lot of different go-to-markets, as opposed to one person who's really specializes in enterprise, because they'll actually help you sort through what is the appropriate go-to-market, and seek 2 to 3 other people, because you'll find there are correlations in the advice, and usually that's a good thread to follow in thinking through your playbook. On the investor side, when you have a pivot, the way I typically suggest, if you're talking to your existing investors, before your investors get together, or before you have a group conversation, warm up the investor. A lot of companies I see won't be sending their investor updates. So the investors won't be aware that something's not working, because they want their follow-on funding, or they just want to, they want to get the introduction, because they're really trying to make this product market fit work, even though it feels a bit like brute force. I really highly recommend sending investor updates, so you're not surprising them when something isn't going well. And then if something isn't going well and you do need to pivot, what I typically recommend doing is getting on a call with your investors and warming them up and letting them know what you have uncovered, what you are thinking about doing, getting feedback around that. And really figuring out the approach together in a collaborative way, because that is what investors are for. We're here to support you. We have a stake in the company. We want you to be successful. So really looking at that, I always recommend companies have a active investor versus a passive investor on their cap table as well, because those active investors are really much more engaged typically, and they do typically have operating background versus just investing background. So that's the second piece of it. So warm up the investors, and then when you get them together for everyone to talk, you've come up with a game plan, and everyone's bought in on the game plan when they get together. Now, if you're pitching it in a fundraise, it's a little different. What you need to have a cohesive story on what you've learned and how you've learned it and what your plan is. If it's a dramatic shift, there needs to be some proof in what you're going to be doing before you go out and fundraise, as opposed to fundraising when you don't have those proof points. You need to show that you've de-risked the new strategy.
Awesome. Well, we've dealt with this whole pandemic this last year. We're still dealing with it. Based on your experience, how do you see that the pandemic has influenced the way that investors and founders interact? I mean, you're not meeting in person anymore, for one, right?
Yeah. For me, it actually hasn't changed that much because I did so much. I'm based in San Francisco, but I invest in the early stage, and founders at the early stage are really, really busy. And so I try and be respectful of that. I meet the founders when I have the opportunity, but I try and do at least a first call via video anyway. So that actually hasn't changed that much for me myself. Um, but I know, for example, the higher touch points, because we can't meet in person in a lot of cases, is helpful. Like I said, those investor updates are especially helpful. Um, getting on a call with your investor from time to time. I have really good text relationships with a lot of our founders. We chat on a pretty regular basis. They'll check in with me on something they need, or ask for an introduction to someone, or try and flush out a problem. Those things are actually really helpful for building a relationship, because you have a pulse on what's going on for the company. But not that much has actually changed for me. When I was running the cohort in San Francisco for our B2B SaaS accelerator, we also have a seed fund on top of that. But for the B2B SaaS accelerator, the thing I really saw shift was actually for the founders. We usually had our group of founders pretty close to one another, and they'd have really strong relationships at the end of the program. It's one of the things we've really tried to foster as a program. Because it's a support system. Mental health is a really important thing when it comes to the founding ecosystem. And so that piece has dropped off a little bit. What's interesting is the group that actually went through the pandemic together, we had two cohorts, one halfway through, and the other group actually full through. They still actually have Zooms once a month, where our previous founder networks, they kind of catch up with one another from time to time, get together for beers. But this group actually now these two groups actually get together for lunch, which I think is pretty cool, because most of them were based outside the Bay Area.
I think it's key what you're saying, the outside of the Bay Area, because we are based in Miami, and we're seeing so many people coming here now. So how do you envision the after COVID world, especially in tech?
Yeah. So I am a big advocate of getting outside the Bay Area, just to be completely honest. I know a lot of VCs would kind of shame me for that one, but the cash flow of businesses it is dramatically extended by being outside the Bay Area. The cost of living in San Francisco, the competitiveness of talent, taxes, all of those things are pretty dramatic factors that make it you spend through your capital much faster. And so there is a benefit to being located in secondary and tertiary ecosystems. That said, I do think before the pandemic, there was a value in spending some time in the Bay Area, or New York, or Austin for that matter. I know that's a growing ecosystem because of the networks that existed there. You'd sit down, and I know, George, you did your stint in the Bay too. There's a network there where you sit down and start talking to the stranger next to you at a bar, and the person's a founder of a crazy company. I mean, I met Kevin Hartz at a Starbucks at my old house, and got to know him. If you're those of you who don't know him, he's the co-founder of Eventbrite. One of my friends, we spent our 40th birthday at Ron Conway's house because, he invested in one of his previous companies, and it was just, the house was empty, so he let him have it. And so I feel like I'm sounding like a little bit of a snob here, but it's not actually like that. It is.
Yeah. And for everyone, Ron Conway was an early Google investor and has invested in a lot of different companies. But, he just needed Google, right?
Yeah, it's a crazy ecosystem, and it sounds super weird, but I was invited to Necker Island by a group of entrepreneurs that I met through a friend. So it's a really interesting ecosystem, and despite all the things that people complain about Silicon Valley, I definitely have my complaints. I'm from Northern California, born and raised, but there were a lot of really great things for teaching people how to found and lead a company, and the community that existed there. I know there were founder meditation groups. There were some groups that spun out around Stanford's touchy-feely class that were specifically for founders. There is a mental health group that specifically is focused on founder psychology and mental health that's starting to do some research around it. There's some really cool things
I
that have come
needed
out
that
of
after
there.
first cut, let me tell you.
I'm sure everyone needs it. Honestly, there are only 37 studies. I'm talking about it because it's one of the areas I'm digging into a bit, but there are only 37 studies that have actually been focused specifically on founder psychology. And founders really do have a different DNA. Anyway, so, and they deal with a lot of stress. So, there's some really great things out of Silicon Valley, and I'm looking forward to those developing in other markets significantly. George, I know you were in Miami. Miami, I've had several friends move to. I was actually there a year and a half ago and talked to some of the local government and the things they were doing to support the ecosystem. I think it's really impressive. I worry a little bit about the geographic distribution in the market. It's going to be it's going to need a central hub for the tech center the same way like Soma is and things like that. But there is a lot of opportunity in secondary markets. Austin's been going for a long time. New York is solid. Boston's really great for biotech. Seattle's great for B2B. I'm super bullish on Utah and Toronto. So there's a lot of secondary markets that Colorado is another big one, Techstars hub. So I'm pretty impressed with what I'm seeing out of those markets, especially as they start to see some of the bigger exits and that DNA start to be embedded in the natural ecosystem. Atlanta is a big one with Atlanta Tech Hub. And it's just going to be time, for them to develop and a community to evangelize it.
Really good.
Awesome.
So do you plan to come to Miami soon, or?
Exactly.
I probably to visit. I'm one of those people who's a little bit. I have a hard time planting anywhere. Last year, I probably traveled 3 to 4 months out of the year because I do so much remote. It was pretty easy for me. Or not last year, the year before, 2019. Yeah. I try and forget 2020. Yeah. But it's been hard for me not to be able to travel now. So once I get going, once we can start traveling again, I plan on popping around quite a bit. But Miami's definitely a place I will plan on visiting. I don't know where I'll find my home long term.
Awesome. Well, Whitney, thank you so much for joining us. We're super, super thankful for your time. If folks want to learn more about you, let's say follow you on Twitter or LinkedIn, what are some good handles to reach you?
Yeah, so I think at this, I'm still the only Whitney Sales on LinkedIn. My Twitter is at The Sales Method, and my website is also thesalesmethod.com. So, and then if you guys are interested in learning about our B2B SaaS accelerator, it's acceleprise.vc. Awesome. And feel free to reach out to me for anything you guys need. I'm pretty open, and I'm just make it personalized. Don't do some spammy thing, please.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Whitney. Bye.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks.